Yeah, so hi everyone, welcome to Polymath. Thanks for the one clap. It's very good. Yeah, this is a society where I like to discuss everything because everything's interesting in its own way. Today it's going to be about meditation. So Sean, over to you.
Okay, so this is going to be pretty informal, so if you have any questions at all, just interrupt me, or if I say something stupid, or if you know something that I don't know, then feel free to interject. Because most a lot of this, when I study this, it's mostly just ad hoc, because I'm interested in it. So there are a lot of gaps, and there's so much so many different types of meditation, and so many of Buddhist philosophy or Eastern philosophy. So feel free to jump in. Okay, so we know meditation is really old. There's actually some anthropologists that think that it was actually the last phase of human evolution, just the ability to concentrate on one thing and keep that in working memory for a long period of time. So I mean, I haven't been able to find any examples of it, but I've heard that there are even cave drawings where they find people sitting in the lotus position. So that's evidence that it's been around for a long time. So the oldest kind of records that we have of it as a spiritual practice come from Hindu scriptures, really early. Don't have a date for that. And so, especially in a lot of Eastern religions, it's been a big part of their spiritual practice, yoga practices, Hindu, Buddhist, all of that. The way that I know about meditation is through the Buddhist tradition, so that's what I'm going to talk about mostly today. History of Buddhism. So Buddhism started with Siddhartha Gautama. He was the historical Buddha, the first one, and he was alive 480 BC to 400 BC, so if you compare that to Plato, it's roughly the same time. He's a little bit before. So I think actually one of the interesting things about world religion is that it all pretty much happened at around the same time. So at roughly the same time in history, you see Buddha, the ancient Greeks, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and then I don't know exactly what was going on. The Jewish philosophy comes up at about the same time, but I'm not exactly sure what figure that would be. So yeah, so that's kind of interesting. What Siddhartha Gautama was all about is he was a really wealthy prince. That was his father wanted to shield him from any kind of suffering. So basically, from the time he was born, he was always surrounded with luxury. Every need that he had was taken care of. He was educated really well, fed really well. And he didn't know any life outside of the palace until he was in his 20s. And then he kind of went out to go see what the people were like. And they say that he met a diseased man, an aging man, a dying man, and he was just overcome with the suffering that normal people felt. And it was a big shock for him to he had never thought about the fact that you get old and die, or that you get sick, because he was just always around young, safe, beautiful things, and every need was provided for. So that kind of shook him. He had this big existential crisis, and decided to leave his kingdom and study the spiritual path. So he wasn't the first one to invent meditation. Like I said, it's been around for a long time, and especially at that time, Hindu religions were prominent. I think that's probably, he was Brahmin, so I think that's probably what his family was. And so he went to go study with an ascetic. Is that how you say that, ascetic? I never know if it's a hard C. No, the word ascetic, ASCETIC,
yeah,
ascetic, yeah. So he went to go study in an ascetic school. It was focused on meditation, but it was really on self-denial of the body. So the idea kind of there is that the body is holding you back from spiritual realization. So there's a balance between the body and the spirit. And so if you deny more of the body, then you get closer to the spirit. So that's kind of what they do. They they ate very little. They starved themselves, and that's why you see he's really kind of skinny and emaciated there, because that's what he practiced for a long time, and it didn't really work for him. He almost died when he was doing this, and so the story is that he was found by a lake or something, passed out, and this girl brought him water and kind of got him back on his feet. And so that was the point that he like rejected asceticism and decided that there should be like a middle way between the luxury and self-indulgence that he experienced in the palace and the asceticism that he practiced, like trying to get away from that. So Buddhism is all about like trying to find a middle way between those two paths. So after the girl like recovered him, he decided to like practice this middle way, and he sat under the Bodhi tree he said that he would not leave until he reached enlightenment, and I don't know how long is like the tradition says that he was there, but he sat and practiced there for a really long time until he reached enlightenment. So that's kind of his story. So after that, one of the cool things about Buddhism is that it's really pretty empirical. Like what Siddhartha Gautama taught was principally about suffering. He was focused on like the causes of suffering, trying to understand what the causes were and how to overcome them. So most of what he taught wasn't really anything about like weird mystical experiences or like understanding the true nature of reality or anything like metaphysical. It was very practical, very much about the thoughts in your mind that cause suffering and how to get over that. So the way that Buddhism kind of spreads is that he taught what he learned to his followers and they taught to their followers. So there's like this very strict master-student relationship in Buddhism, and also respect for finding other ways. So typically what will happen with like a spiritual master is they practice in like one tradition, it's not really working out for them, they try like another tradition, maybe eventually they develop like their own like style of practice, and like that's what ends up working for them, and that's what they teach their students. So Buddhism like fractures really easily. So this is just like a small sample of like things that I've heard of and like that might be popular in the West. Like it's actually like a much bigger tree than that. So like you could say that like Buddhism started with Siddhartha Gautama, and then there's like 3 main branches that you can classify most Buddhisms under. There's Mahayana, which is the most popular. That's about 53% of practitioners today practice some form of Mahayana Buddhism. And there's Theravada and Vajrayana. So Vajrayana, mostly you'll find like Tibetan practice, like the Dalai Lama, that's kind of what their tradition is. And then Theravada is practiced in like Sri Lanka and Thailand and some parts of like Southeast Asia. And then Mahayana is most other traditions. And so like you can see like just within Zen, like Zen is like a part of Mahayana, and you get like Chinese Zen, Japanese Zen, Vietnamese Zen, and then Japanese further breaks down to like Soto Rinzai, Sambo Kyudon, and then Vietnamese with Tien and Plum Village. So like there's just like so many more things in here. So there's, like I said, like there's so many different types of traditions and so many different ways to like practice and to meditate, and all these have like slight variations on that. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about how like Zen, because like that's what I know most about. So it started in India, and then moved to China with, it's called Chan. Zen is just a Japanese translation of Chan, the word Chan. And that's when Buddhism kind of took on elements of like Taoism. So there's the like, idea of like the Tao, like the nature or the way, and of just like trying to go with nature and follow nature and not like resist the natural order. And so you see like a lot of that influence in Zen. And then like as it moved to Japan, you incorporate elements of like Shintoism and then like the culture there. So like the interesting thing about Buddhism is that it's pretty lightweight, since it's really primarily about understanding your mind, meditation, and avoiding the causes of suffering. So like it picks up like new cultural relics every time it moves into another culture. So like Japanese Buddhism, it's like the same core tenets, but then like incorporates elements of like Japanese culture and so on. Yeah, so I guess just a little bit about like what I practice is following a Vietnamese master. So like in Vietnam you have Tien, which is just like Vietnamese Zen practice, and it's like really traditional. When you go there, like if you practice there, you have to wear like a bunch of robes, and like the men and women are like kept really separate. But what happened is during the war, there was this activist named Thich Nhat Hanh that was a Buddhist monk, and he was really opposed to the war. And he was actually banished by both sides. So like he went to the south, and he was like, you should really stop this war, and like they said that he was just a communist. And then he went to the north and said that you should really stop this war. And they said that he was just like a puppet of the South. And so he like came to America, worked with like Martin Luther King, taught at like I think Columbia for a couple of years, like tried to like spread the word in the West, and then like ended up in France where like started a monastery there. And so that's where I was this summer. So that's the one that I know the most about. And the interesting thing about that is he tries to take like the really like traditional Vietnamese Zen and like strip it of like all of the really like Eastern cultural relics and like make it relevant for like a Western audience. So that's like very liberal, very like secular form of like Buddhist practice. Okay, so a brief history of like Buddhism in America. So you have D.T. Suzuki in 1897, and he was a Japanese Buddhist scholar that was like one of the first in America to really like bring the scholarship of like Buddhist texts to like prominence. Like it was not really seen as, I guess probably like at that point they didn't really even have like people in the West like really studying it. Probably no one like knew those languages. So like 19th century you also have like same time as like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer in Europe. They're like reading some translations of like Buddhist texts and like railing against like the predominant Christianity there. And you also have like Emerson and Thoreau in America that are experimenting with like different types of Christianity, trying to come up with like a more inclusive like religion, and like they're also inspired by these Buddhist thinkers. So like that's kind of the context that Suzuki was in. And they have like the 50s with like the beat movement. You've got like Jack Kerouac and like the beat poets that are like fed up with like the capitalism of like American society and just like trying to like get away from it all and like find like a new spiritual path. And also like Alan Watts, who was a British philosopher that studied Christianity and Buddhism, ultimately went with Buddhism and gave a lot of like public radio talks like just to the public, trying to like spread Buddhism, and he was like a big part of like the counterculture. And then in 1959 you have Shunryu Suzuki founding the San Francisco Zen Center. So like at that time, like in America, obviously San Francisco was still cool. And that's like a big center of like the beat movement. And so like that was a big area of like countercultural influence. So the San Francisco Zen Center was really big in like spreading Buddhism to the West and like making it semi-credible. And also Shunryu Suzuki was really influential for Steve Jobs. If you like read his biography, you'll see that he said Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind was like one of the most influential books of his life. And so that's kind of like also a big element in making it like modern and like relevant and like not completely crazy to the West. Yeah.
Just you mentioned Steve Jobs, and like typically you'll see like kind of Eastern philosophies are more prevalent among high tech sectors. Like not only Steve Jobs, but you also have people like Larry Ellison, all kinds of different tech people based around San Francisco. Do you think that that's just kind of a geographic result, or do you think that there's anything more fundamental?
Yeah, so actually, like I think the reason that it's so influential in tech is because a lot of like the tech founders were very countercultural. Like it was all about like, especially with the personal computer revolution, it was all about like smaller computing, distributed systems, like going against like the mainstream norms of like IBM and all that stuff. So they very much thought of themselves as like young go-getters like against the system. And so that like makes sense why they were like influenced by like counterculture. And like I mean like Steve Jobs was just like crazy when he was younger. Like he's like dropping out of school, just like drinking carrot juice all the time, like and like meditating. So I don't think it's a coincidence that all of those people were interested in like the countercultural relics of the time. Also, like I mean, I think the reason why it's still prevalent today is because you can definitely see performance benefits from meditation. Like if you're focusing on like concentration and things like that, then like it makes you like more focused, like you get tired less easily. So that's like also you see nowadays there are like books being published on meditation by like hedge fund managers and things, like trying to like just like incorporate this into like the high stress like culture. There's just like, you know, if you meditate you can like get more work done and like be less stressed out. And
Ariana Huffington is a big advocate.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, also Philip Kapleau, he's also a big figure in Buddhism in the West. I read his book. 1970s, you also have like the Dalai Lama coming to prominence, especially as like really most like people in the West were pretty sympathetic to Tibet. So when he became prominent and started giving talks, people were attracted to that too. And now, like I said, you have some like secular meditation practices, like also secular meditation practices that aren't so like Wall Street. And you have people trying to come up with like a distinctly American form of Buddhism. So like a lot of people that are really interested in Buddhism kind of like recognize that it has a lot of this like superstitious, like Eastern, like cultural heritage, and like that might be getting in the way of adopting Buddhism for some people. So they kind of want to try to make it their own, and like just like as it, you know, incorporated like elements of Taoism when it went to China, and Shintoism when it went to Japan, like just like taking the core teachings of Buddhism and like trying to like give it an American or like secular spin. So you have like pragmatic Buddhism, which tries to like read Buddhist teaching through American pragmatism. So the idea that it's mostly an epistemological idea that it's not so much important like the metaphysical contents or whether or not it's like actually true per se, but just like does it work, and like does this like idea work for you? So that's kind of where pragmatic Buddhism goes. Secular Buddhism wants to strip it of religion and just focus on like the health benefits of meditation or something like that. And you get like engaged Buddhism with like Thich Nhat Hanh, which is like a more like liberal, politically active like form of like Buddhist ethics. And you have like MBSR. Has anyone here heard of MBSR? Okay, so that's mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's actually founded by an American psychologist who studied under Thich Nhat Hanh and wanted to kind of solidify the scientific understanding of like meditation and the health benefits from it. So he just took meditation practices, did a bunch of experiments, stripped it of all the like religious practices or ritual and anything like that, and just created like an anxiety reduction program. So it's like 8 weeks of like guided meditations and stuff. You like do it in a group, you pay for it, and it's supposed to just like, it's just like a therapy. And that's a way that a lot of people in the West get into meditation. So it's like purely secular, medical form of meditation. Okay, so what is meditation? So the Tibetan word for meditation is gam, which means to become familiar with, and it has like strong connotations of like training, like mind training. So basically like any form of meditation is just a way to become familiar with your mind and like understand your thought processes and understand better the motivations behind your actions. So there are a couple different forms of meditation that I'm going to talk about because they're the ones that I know. The first is concentration meditation, and the purpose is to develop a one-pointedness of mind. So this is people will go and they'll like sit in front of like a white screen and just count their breath or focus on like one particular image, and the idea is to eliminate all distractions, to have like a completely like tranquil mind, no wandering, and eliminate the discursive mind. So the discursive mind is just like the like dialectical, like discussion oriented mind, like the inner speech, like when you're just talking to yourself. So the point of that is to just like completely eliminate all of that. So there's like no thoughts, no speech, nothing. And like I said, the way they do that is primarily with like breath counting. So you just like breathe, you watch your breath, and every exhale you count. And you just like focus, you try to concentrate all of your attention on just the breath and the counting. And so it's a way to give yourself like a mental marker so you know like when your concentration has started to waver. So like if you miscount or you're not exactly sure what number you're on, then like that's a way for you to know like, okay, I was distracted. What was distracting me? Like where did that thought come from? Why am I thinking it? And when you do this kind of meditation, the important thing to know is that you're not like repressing any thoughts. You're not saying that like this thought is bad or I shouldn't have thought that. The important thing is to just like recognize the thought, understand that it's there, and just like let it go. And so if you do that, then the idea is that eventually those thoughts won't trouble you and you'll be able to like achieve a tranquil mind. Also, you can do concentration by focusing on like a mental image of something and just like try to hold that in your mind as much as possible. It's just like another mental marker to know that like when that image starts to waver, then you know that you're not concentrating. Also, some people use a candle. And so what this is in some like Japanese Zen practices when they're doing concentration, the students will like sit and try to concentrate as hard as possible, and the master will go around with like that big stick and just like hit them. And the idea behind that is that they focus on like sudden enlightenment. So they think that like if you concentrate your mind like really hard to like one single point of focus, then they can just like kind of shock you into like achieving insight. So that's
blindsiding your ass into enlightenment.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. Another one is mindfulness meditation, and this is, you've probably heard a lot about mindfulness. That's pretty popular now. And so the purpose, rather than a single pointed concentration, is broad awareness. So the way they do that is just to sit and to breathe. It's really simple sounding, but actually really hard to do. Because the nice thing about concentration meditation is when you have that breath counting, it's easy to see when your mind wanders. But when you're just sitting and you're trying to keep your awareness open, it's really hard for you to become aware that you're no longer focused or to be able to reel in your thoughts. So the basic idea behind mindfulness meditation is that you're just going to sit and you pay attention to your breath and you try to just be aware of everything around you. So sometimes they'll say like, just try to think of like 5 sounds that you hear. So you might hear like the talking in the other room, you'd hear like the sound of my voice, you might hear the hum of the lights or something like that. And so it's just to like increase your awareness and your sense perception so that you get over the idea of zoning in and only focusing on certain things. Last is Lovingkindness Meditation. I think this is particularly popular in Tibetan Buddhism. And the purpose is to develop compassion. And the way they do that is mostly through visualization. So usually in Lovingkindness Meditation, sometimes they'll have like chanting or like some kind of like song going on, but you could also do that without it. And the step is, so for a couple minutes, you're just supposed to visualize someone that it's easier for you to feel compassion for. So like a loved one, even yourself, someone that you have like a lot of affection for. And it's just to generate feelings of compassion for that person. And then after a couple minutes of that, you switch to someone that it's maybe that you are neutral towards. Just like some random stranger, some like acquaintance that you don't really know. And you try to generate compassion for that person. And then after that, you move on to someone that it's really hard for you to feel compassion for, someone that you don't really like, and you generate compassion for that person, and then you move on to generating compassion for all sentient beings. And I think loving-kindness meditation is one of the most studied, and you see a lot of like brain benefits from developing compassion. I think it's actually, from an ethics point of view, like most ethicists will say that compassion is one of the most important moral sentiments, and so having like some kind of like scientific way of like generating that is, I think, potentially really useful. So that's kind of the end of what I had.